Go. Hello, and welcome to PMP Live. I'm Alan Watke, an event coordinator with Politics and Prose. Thank you for joining us in this new format in the midst of these unprecedented events, from the pandemic, which forced us all inside our homes, to the worldwide police brutality protests that are now urging us to get back out of them. Throughout all of this, we strive to continue to bring you the authors you love and their new books to the Politics and Prose community. At any time during the event, you can click on the link in the chat to pre-order Together in a Sudden Strangeness on Politics and Prose's website, which will be released in November. But if you pre-order tonight, you will receive a copy signed by 5 of the contributors. Also, currently available is the ebook to purchase while you wait for that hard copy to arrive. And if you purchase that, if you do the ebook, then in November, when you get the hardcover copy, you'll also get an updated version with, I believe it's 20 more poems added to it. So that's just fantastic. Our physical stores are still closed, and we do need your online purchases to, in order to keep bringing you the programming PMP is known for. Finally, we want to thank you all for being here with us today. We're so thankful to our family of loyal customers keeping our business and our spirits afloat. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Alice Quinn and Ron Charles and some very special guests to PMP Live. Alice is the editor of Together in a Sudden Strangeness, was executive director of the Poetry Society of America for 18 years. She was a poetry editor at the New Yorker from 1987 to 2007, and the Alfred A. Knopf publisher from 1976 to 1986. Ron is a hilarious editor of Book World and the host of the Totally Hip video book review at the Washington Post. We're so excited to have them both here tonight, and just this roster of amazing poets. And so without further ado, please welcome to PMP Live, Alice Quinn and Ron Charles.
Thank you so much, Alan. Hello, Alice.
Hi, Ron.
This is a great night. We've got this lovely collection. Thank you for being here. You've assembled some of your contributors to speak, to recite their poems after we're done talking for a few minutes. This is just lovely. We're just gonna talk for a few minutes and then we'll hear from some poets. Is that all right?
Perfect.
Okay, great. To begin, has everyone and you and your family, are they all healthy? Are they all getting through this pandemic?
Yes, yes.
Good. That's good. What made you think of putting together a collection like this?
Well, I owe the inspiration to somebody with whom Deb Garrison and I both worked at the New Yorker in the Tina Brown years. His name is David Kuhn, and he became a literary agent. His agency is called Avitas, and in his 5 or 6 years at the New Yorker, you know, he became aware of how many poets I knew. In my years there, we published almost 2,500 poems. So when I said to him the other day, I owe you so much, he said, Alice, all I did was call you and give you a deadline. And that's true.
At a time when, you know, many of us are feeling so isolated in this and discombobulated during the quarantine, a collection like this with its title, which comes from a poem by Neruda, is just so lovely. Tell us about that title and what inspired you to pick that.
Well, actually, somebody with whom my partner worked at Natural Resources Defense Council sent it to her in an email, and she shared it with me, and I said, oh gosh, we had that poem in an event which the Poetry Society sponsored after 9/11.
Oh.
And the translation was by Alistair Reid, Deb Garrison's and my colleague at the New Yorker for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And C.K. Williams wanted to read the poem at the event, and Alistair had translated it. So I had Charlie Williams read the English, which belonged to Alistair, and Alistair read the Spanish next to him. So it just felt very magical. to come upon these incredible lines, really. You know, now we'll count to 12 and we'll all keep still. Let's stop for a second. It would be an exotic moment without rush. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. And it seemed to speak of an opportunity for renewal and rethinking an awful lot of things.
Right. And it is a strange moment we're in. I mean, no one's ever gone through anything quite like this long months of quarantine,
Right.
not knowing. It is a very strange
Yes,
cessation.
not knowing is unbounded.
Right. Can you remember when it was going to be 2 weeks?
Mm.
Yeah.
You know, I always think of Robert Frost in one of my favorite poems of his directive, the way that it seems to speak to poetry, the way there, if you'll let a guide direct you, who only has at heart you're getting lost. And that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, it is. Somebody who's having trouble getting anything done lately, I'm especially amazed by the remarkable speed of this endeavor. I mean, take us through the actual mechanics of conceiving, pitching, collecting, editing, and publishing a book in a matter of weeks. Was it 40 days you did this?
It was, isn't that amazing? Well, David called me, I believe, on March 24th. He said, you know, it has to be quick. And so I got to work on March 27th, and I wrote I didn't have my New Yorker address book or Rolodex, so I worked from my computer with as many addresses as I could quickly find. And of course, I made guesses about who was likely to be writing now. So I wrote to 125 poets, and I sent them each my wish list with those 125 names and said, if you know of anybody who's writing poetry whom you admire, and they're not on this list, there are a lot of people who aren't,
Right.
Would you please recommend them and send me their email address? So that augmented in a week or so to 230 or 40. And in the end, I corresponded with probably 300 people, but that's still a very strong rate of success, which tells me that the poets who sent in poems really felt that they were up to the standard of their best work.
And what was the pitch? What was the pitch you gave them? What did you ask for?
All I said was, if you are writing poems addressing this moment, I would like to hear from you. I knew that that would invite the widest range if I didn't suggest any thematic parameters.
Right, right. That element of speed is not just a curiosity, although it is amazing. It's part of what makes the collection so valuable, I think, because, I mean, later the book will serve as a poetic record of what we all went through, but right now, together in a sudden strangeness serves a very different role. What do you hope the collection like this can do in the middle of a pandemic that is still ongoing?
Well, I always think of the four quartets. Time present and time past are both included in time future, and time future in time past. I mean, there is an eternal aspect to what we are going through, to people in duress, to people wanting to connect and not being able to finding ways to toast each other in Italy and to celebrate the spring, and also to confront and challenge apocalyptic reality and longing and grief. And, you know, there are wonderful love poems in the book.
We hear poems at weddings and at funerals and at graduations, but occasional poems are relatively rare in America, don't you think? I mean, I'm thinking, for instance, that our poet laureate is not charged with writing about the 4th of July every year, or writing a poem for the presidential inauguration. We don't do that the way the British do, for instance.
Right.
What are your conversations like as you asked for poets to write about this crisis? Did it feel prescribed to them? Did it feel like they were being asked to do something that wasn't natural, or were they already doing it?
Oh, I think they were already doing it. And I knew that they would be, many of them would be, because of 9/11 at the New Yorker. I mean, we had a slew of fantastic poems. It was a total act of mercy that Adam Zagievsky sent me Try to Praise the Mutilated World the very week that happened. And we could put it on the back page. And Deb Garrison had a wonderful poem I saw you walking, about seeing people walking up the up the west side by the river with torn shirt sleeves from their lives on Wall Street. And Vijay Seshadri had a beautiful poem called The Disappearances, and Merwin had a poem called To the Words. I mean, and also we had all had the experience of the phenomenal poetry of witness in Poland and other countries in the Soviet occupation. I mean, you couldn't be a poet decade after decade in Poland and not have your poetry partake of that reality. And this is a very, very dramatic moment for us. And we're all experiencing it together. So also poets are seers, you know, they see a poem, they see the occasion for a poem. Stephen Campa, one of the poets in the book, said that when he overheard two children on one of his rare walks up in a mulberry tree, one of them saying to the other one, "I'm half drunk on mulberries," he knew he had a poem.
I bet when some people hear that you've collected poems about a pandemic, it sounds pretty grim, like a collection of plague dirges, but that is not what happens here. I mean, this there is, as you say, tremendous variety. Did that surprise you? Did you engineer that?
No, it didn't surprise me, because our poetry is very, very robust right now. And when I just look at the titles of these poems and the names of these poets, and I reflect on the various sensibilities and temperaments and backgrounds and circumstances of each of them, it was bound to be a wide range. And, you know, I was aiming for, you know, kind of a diversity of like maybe 30%, and we easily got there. I mean, we have Arab American poets. Tommy Orange, the Native American, wrote a wonderful poem. We have lots of Latina poets and lots of East Asian American poets and more than a dozen Black poets. And, you know, I think it's a very, very natural upswelling at this moment.
The diversity of forms and themes and tones surprised me, though. It was much more diverse than I expected. I did expect a kind of grimness.
Yeah, but they're not grim. And you know, Ron, one of the more I dwell in these poems, and I haven't had more than 40 days, so I've only read some of them 5 times, but the more I dwell in them and the more they speak to each other. You know, the love poems of Linda Gregerson speak to the love poem of Patrick Phillips, and the beautiful, tranquil lyric poem that Garrett Hongo wrote beside his daughter under a full moon, you know, speaks in contrast to the conviviality of a poem by Susan Mitchell, which is about, you know, how luxurious conversation used to be in other times, you know, all night parties and stumbling down the stairs and into the subway. And she starts her poem, no, they don't make them the way they used to, conversations with real cornices and windows overlooking parks where children played and old men fed pigeons. You know, it's just got this wonderful jaunty tone that is so in contrast to the tranquility and serenity and seeking aspect of Garrett Hongo's. And also Garrett's poem is about his daughter, and Deb's poem is about her daughter. And so the poems, and I think you were inquiring as about thematic issues. Were you going to ask me about that too?
Right, yeah, yes.
Because, you know, I don't know why, but when we were assembling these poems, we had alphabetized them according to the author's first names.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because the poems are not arranged, like they're not grouped in any way. They're just alphabetical by last name.
Well, they were originally, believe it or not, alphabetical by first name. It was Cuckoo. And one day I said to Deb, let's put our heads back on and do this, you know, by their last names. And all of a sudden we realized it was A to Z, from Yulia Alvarez with her incredible poem, How Will This Pandemic Affect Poetry, to Matthew Zapruder's poem, which ends I love my little son, his bare pajamas, my wife, the grass, the ends of poems. So it opens with this, will the pandemic affect poetry? And it ends with, I love the ends of poems. And that struck us as so serendipitous, and that we just decided we don't need categories. Although I happen to love, I love thematic anthologies. I love Walter de la Mare's Come Hither, with his wonderful themes of feasts and fairies and beggars and gypsies, and his wonderful Behold This Dreamer that has categories of night and visitation and the unconscious, but we just didn't need it. And actually it allows the reader to experience the book as kind of a cat's cradle. And the readers themselves can make these connections and have them images and scenes and tonality and atmosphere reverberate personally for them.
And it is remarkable, because you could have easily spent another 40 days trying to get them in the right order.
Oh, I know, that was also, it had a shortcut aspect to it, taking the other route.
Yeah, so you really, I don't know if you lucked out or God was involved or whatever, but it worked out just fine. Let's turn to the main part of our program now and introduce the poets one by one, and they will turn on their video and their audio, and they'll read us a poem.
That's great. Well, I'm going to introduce the poets in terms of their geography, because it's another aspect of the diversity and marvelous range of this book, that we have poems from Tennessee and Texas and Vermont and Virginia and everywhere. So we're going to begin with Joshua Bennett's poem, Dad Poem, and Joshua is now in Boston.
Hi, everyone. This is a poem entitled Dad Poem. I wrote it several months ago, where due to the restrictions of the pandemic, I wasn't able to attend my son's first ultrasound. And so often, especially as of late, thinking about George Floyd and his daughter, in a video I saw of his daughter saying, "Daddy changed the world," I've been thinking a lot about what it meant that he was a father, and about Black fatherhood as a kind of historical difficulty. And so in his spirit, I'm thinking about him. This is Dad Poem. "No visitors allowed," is what the masked woman behind the desk says, only seconds after me and your mother arrive for the ultrasound. "But I'm the father," I explain, like it means something defensible. She looks at me as if I've just confessed to being a minotaur in human disguise, repeats the line. Caught in the space between astonishment and rage, we hold hands a minute or so more, imagining you a final time before our rushed goodbye, your mother vanishing down the corridor to call forth a veiled vision of you through glowing white machines. One she will bring to me later on, printed and slightly wrinkled at its edges, this second-hand sight of you, almost unbearable, both for its beauty and necessary deferral. What can I be to you now, smallest one, across the expanse of category and world catastrophe? What love persists in a time without touch?
Thank you, Joshua. So our next poem is by Billy Collins. The title is Sequestration, and Billy is in Winter Park, Florida.
Thank you, Alice, for having me part of this anthology. Sequestration is the biggest word in the poem, but that is the title, Sequestration. No one's going anywhere, and they say it's like this all over the rooftops and the quarters of the world. Whenever a doorbell buzzes, a man and a woman freeze in place. No one wants to touch the package left on the welcome mat. Sometimes she'll get up from reading everybody's horoscope to have a look in the pantry, or he will draw back a curtain and see a man below on the street vanishing around a corner. Mostly there is nothing to do. They sit in separate rooms, guarding their own lives, two pilot lights flickering where their hearts used to beat.
Such a perfect image. Thank you, Billy.
You're very welcome.
Like a match going out. Our next poet is Cornelius Eady, and he's on Long Island. And his title is Corona Diary.
Hi. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Be sure. Thank you, Alice, for inviting me to share this with everyone else. This is a poem that I wrote in the early days of the coronavirus, when we were getting various stories about what it was and what it wasn't, and everyone was now stalled in their houses. My response to this was to start to write a series of Corona folk songs. And I'm only mentioning this because in the poem you will hear mention of a singer who is sick, and that singer happens to be the singer and songwriter John Prine, who actually died soon after that. But also, as I now remember it, it was partly the trigger that got me to actually cover one of John Prine's songs for this project. So all these things are tied together. Corona Diary. These days, you want the poem to be a mask, soft veil between what floats invisible but known in the air. You've just read that there's a singer you love who might be breathing their last, and wish the poem could travel, unobtrusive, as poems do, from the page to the brain, a fan's medicine. Those of us who are lucky enough to stay indoors with a salary count the days by press conference. For others, there's always the dog and the park and the dog. A relative calls. How you doing? Are you a ghost? The buds emerge on time for their brief duty. The poem longs to be a filter, but in floats spring's insistence. We wait.
It's great, Cornelius. I love the way that the veils in your poems speak to the veils in Joshua's too. Deb Garrison is our next poet, and she is reading her poem, Leaving Evanston, from Montclair, New Jersey.
Thank you, Alice and Ron and Politics and Prose. And also, since I did have this very fortunate position of, after having given a poem to Alice, I then ended up very lucky getting to also help work on the book at Knopf. So I want to take this opportunity to thank the poets assembled here, and also all the poets in this book, and all the poets who shared work with Alice. Your work, not only during a pandemic, really enriches our lives every single day. And especially now, it's so important as you speak truth. We need you. Then about Leaving Evanston, I'll just say quickly, this really it comes out of the moment kind of similar to Cornelius early in the pandemic, when that kind of mid-March moment when all across America, parents and students realized that what we often call the senior spring was not going to happen for a whole generation that's graduating this year. And so I had, of course, a lot of grief from that. I have a senior in high school and a senior in college, so we have kind of a double whammy at our house with the senior spring sadness. But anyway, I wanted to shout out, this poem is written about some graduates of Northwestern, so I wanted to shout out the class of 2020 there and thank them, but also say, lest we think that they are still, crying tears about their graduation day, I want to commend this group of young people who are out in the street, all of them, 100% of them. They're all in the street challenging the injustices that we're facing, and also schooling their parents in how to have incredibly difficult, important conversations. So thank you to these young people. And I'll read Leaving Evanston. She left the bed made, though it rarely was. It was where she studied, talked to home, and where she'd loved a couple of boys. Actually, it was just one she'd loved. She'd heard he wasn't going, imagined him shacked up with the new girl, with canned goods, condoms, and red wine. She might never see him again. No, that was too dramatic of her. She'd see him in New York, LA, DC, or Louisville, some city where theater majors went to repot themselves like new plants with not quite enough soil to grow roots. She remembered now the morning she'd been late to warm-ups and her professor said a sharp word. Her mentor, she could use that term since it was over, and she sobbed in the bathroom. She remembered her homesickness, and then a spring day, the lake offering its broad face to them all as they shed jackets and recognized their friends arriving as at a grand outdoor wedding, their sophomoric marriage to this place. This coming Monday would have been their showcase. She was meant to do Anne Frank's scene in the attic with Peter, LOL. She considered the fridge and threw out her favorite pesto, the portions of salmon she'd frozen. She felt suddenly old, in the posture of her mother, peering in and assessing, tossing and wiping with good-smelling spray her mother had in fact bought her in September. Would she become a practical person? She still didn't keep a calendar, but she knew the dates. Their play was meant to go up the first weekend in June, commencement to have been the 19th. Was it just last Friday? They were laughing in the rehearsal room and then crying because of the tender monologue she'd written for her friend who already had her union card and was playing a female astronomer who'd lost her mother to cancer, who 100 years ago was measuring the distance to the stars. She knew there were other griefs, generations of them. This one was theirs. She shut the lights and locked the door. She had the video on her phone and would show it to her parents.
Thanks, Deb.
Thanks to all of you.
Our next poet is Ada Limon. Her poem was in the New Yorker. It's one of several which Kevin Young and the New Yorker ran. And in fact, Ada just told us tonight that she was a theater major, and she's in one of those three places which Deb refers to as where theater majors repot themselves, Louisville, Kentucky.
I'm in Lexington, but very close.
Lexington, yeah. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It's such a pleasure to be here and hear all these poems. I'm really grateful to Alice and Ron for the conversation and for Alice's work in putting this together. I think it will serve as essential remembering and ongoingness of this time. This is a poem that Kevin Young chose for the New Yorker, and I think it came out of a time when I really felt flattened and silenced by what was happening in the world. And it felt like I couldn't enter into poems, and that meant I couldn't really read poems and I couldn't enter my own poems. And of course, in the great gift that is poetry, that struggle became a poem. The end of poetry. Enough of osseous and chickadee and sunflower and snowshoes, maple and seeds, samara and shoot. Enough chiaroscuro, enough of thus and prophecy and the stoic farmer and faith and our Father and 'tis of thee. Enough of bosom and bud, skin and God not forgetting, and star bodies and frozen birds. Enough of the will to go on and not go on, or how a certain light does a certain thing. Enough of the kneeling and the rising and the looking inward and the looking up. Enough of the gun, the drama, the acquaintance's suicide, the long-lost letter on the dresser, enough of the longing, the ego, and the obliteration of ego, enough of the mother, and the child, and the father, and the child, and enough of the pointing to the world, weary and desperate, enough of the brutal and the border, enough can you see me, can you hear me, enough I am human, enough I am alone and I am desperate, enough of the animal saving me, enough of the high water, enough sorrow, enough of the air and its ease. I am asking you to touch me.
Thank you. Thank you, Ada, so much.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. You know, well, quite a number of these poems, I feel, culminate in a cri de coeur. And yours is one, and Camilla, Aisha Moon, who is going to read last, her poem ends in that kind of cry too. Really arresting and special. Ahmed Majmudar, our next poet, is a physician, a radiologist, and he will be reading his poem, An American Nurse Foresees Her Death. And he is in Columbus, Ohio.
I am. Thank you so much, Alice, and thank you for having all these wonderful poets here who are just reading such amazing poems. My poem is An American Nurse Foresees Her Death. It was inspired very early in the pandemic when in my hospital system, the number of inpatient COVID-19 cases actually equaled the number of healthcare providers who worked for the healthcare system who were COVID positive as well. And at that time, you know, one of the main problems around the country was the lack of PPE or personal protective equipment. And so we were scrambling for the right kinds of masks and face guards to prevent transmission to the healthcare providers, nurses, anesthesiologists, pulmonologists, who were, you know, a lot of times taking care of these patients, intubating these patients. And we were actually, our hospital system was reaching out to construction companies around the city to try and find additional masks and respirators. Little did we know that riot police were hoarding large stockpiles until last week. We didn't realize that they all had full face respirators. But in any case, this is called An American Nurse Foresees Her Death. I stepped out of a kill zone shaped like a bedroom, then went home to sleep in my garage. This hand that sponged the fever off a body waves at my kids through the living room window. I text my husband through a weeping wall. The scrubs go in a mommy hamper I warn my kids away from with a Crayola skull and crossbones. The face on the laptop doesn't let on how the knuckles, sanitized raw, bleed in blue gloves, and lunch is an apple between codes. When the shift ends, if it ever ends, I ghost the perimeter of my own life and set the alarm for 4:30 in the morning. The enemy doesn't want me working. The enemy wants to grant me days of rest, a bed of my own in a kill zone shaped like a break room. Nurses I know are nursing nurses through the never-ending fevers ending them. That will be me soon. One or the other, or one, then the other. At Sign Out last Friday, we didn't say bed numbers. We said first names. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. That's a beautiful poem. Our last reader is Camilla Aisha Moon, and she'll be reading her riveting poem entitled Storm, and she's in Atlanta, Georgia.
Good evening, everyone. Oh, wow. I'm so moved. Thank you, Alice, Deborah, and Ron for providing us this space to come together. I'm really just thinking about right now how fortunate all of us are to have poetry to turn to help us connect to each other during these times of isolation and crisis. It's truly a gift. So thank you, and thank you, beautiful poets who've just read, and I'll read Storm. Night squall raging, black branches batter every window as the sky lashes the city. Without devices, all I can do is shelter in place and wait the latest nightmare out, find other sources of power as I sit in the dark, save for a candle burning, for my mother writhing in an ICU, and for the world to make it against all odds. In every sense, I burn in the unseen places, head filling with smoke, each hour lived in a dense haze. Millions weather this 21st century unholy Passover, homes bereft and singed forever. The unruly rich in charge deign themselves gods, maniacal and merciless. Every warning unheeded, no bona fide mark of protection this time, no choice, and the loss is reigning almost everywhere. Candlelight for two is a date. I faintly remember those. Candlelight alone is a seance. Forgive me, my dearly departed, for crying out so often, for still needing you so damn much.
I'll just never forget reading the end of that poem, Camilla. Those words went right into my bloodstream. So thank you all very, very much.
Beautiful. I mean, it's such a small sampling, and it gives such a great sense of this collection and how powerful and diverse and what a range of voices and themes and forms it provides. It's really remarkable.
It shows what poetry can do.
It does. And when you think of the millions of words that have been written about this, in journalism, and the books that we're already starting to see, the intensity of these poems, it's really something special and unique that the journalism and the histories do not capture.
The windows are flung open, Ron, and we're able to connect.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we should emphasize that the book is out as an e-collection, an e-book today. It's a great thing to have. It's a great thing to give. And then there'll be a hardback edition in November people will want to get too. This has been a very special night. Thank you very much for including me, Alice.
Thank you very much, Ron.
Alan, how do we wrap this up?
Hello. Thank you all so very much. Just powerful words, and throughout all of this is exactly the type of thing that we need to be, honing in on, and it's just so great. Thank you again for everyone for being here, and everyone for joining in. I do want to remind you that link to the book is in the chat. I put it in there a couple times. If you purchase it today, you will get it signed by 5 of the contributors. So that's a pretty awesome thing too. You can check our website out, politics-prose.com, for all of our upcoming events. I'm really excited about one coming up on Friday, which is Angela J. Davis, and with a couple friends, and that's on Friday at noon. They're going to be discussing policing the Black man, and everything that's going on right now is going to be just a brilliant discussion. So I'm excited about that. So you can go to our website and click on the link and see all of our upcoming events that we have. So Alice, thank you so much. Ron, it's just fantastic, and really excited to dig into this collection that you've put together, Alice. So,
it's wonderful, Alice.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Absolutely. So I want to thank you all for being here, and stay well and stay well read.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you all.
Thanks again, everybody.